first of all, thanks for making time to speak with me. Appreciate it.
No problem.
What's your reaction to what you've heard coming out of the summit today?
Well, I think from what I've seen, it's a continuation of some good work. I mean, a lot of the stuff I've seen, I know that we worked on as well. Listen, anything towards a continental energy agreement is a positive. You know, one of the things that we always talked about, and you'll remember this, is Canada shouldn't go it alone. So anything where we're working in concert with the U.S. and Mexico on clean energy and climate change is positive. We should be doing whatever we're doing, we should be doing as a continental approach. So glad to see that. Glad to see the action on methane. That's an area in which the oil and gas sector has been doing a lot of good work, and this isn't going to hurt the oil and gas sector. They can do a lot to reduce their greenhouse gases through methane reduction, so that's also a positive for climate change.
All right. Is there anything you heard from in the trilateral climate policy that the leaders have talked about today that you think does present a threat to the oil and gas industry?
Well, it's interesting because everything I've read doesn't, except for the commitment to keeping temperatures below 1.5 degrees. I just don't, you know, from everything I've heard from experts and people in the energy sector, that it's impossible. Having said that, none of what's actually in the fine print, there's no target that would get us to that. There isn't any unrealistic commitments that would reach that goal. So I think in terms of the practical side of it, yes, there's some, you know, the fact that they mentioned the 1.5 degree commitment from Paris, I think, you know, I guess we expect that. But the actual implementation of what I've seen is a continuation of what our government did in the past, and it's practical reductions of greenhouse gases that I do not think will hurt the energy sector, and I think the energy sector is well positioned to help in that area.
All right. What do you think of we're hearing from the three leaders that in the face of Brexit, in the face of Donald Trump in the United States, we're hearing them speak about the importance of integration, political cooperation, economic cooperation. Do you support all that?
Absolutely, absolutely. Listen, Canada is a big country geographically, but we are a small country. In terms of population, we absolutely need free trade. And I mean, NAFTA has been so important to this continent, but important to Canadian businesses. And you know, we are a country made up of small business owners, and a lot of our small business owners are now exporters, and that's how they become, you know, bigger owners of bigger businesses. And we absolutely need the EU trade agreement. We need Trans-Pacific Partnership. I mean, trade is important for the future prosperity of this country, and it's been important for the prosperity of this country to date. So we have to, all of us who believe in free markets, all of us who believe in free trade, have to, as much as possible, talk about the importance of free trade and the prosperity that comes with it for our country.
Right. What about, so the ratification process continues for the TPP in this country. It's in the Mexican Senate, it's in the U.S. Congress. What would your message be to this government about sending a strong signal about where Canada stands on free trade with, again, the rhetoric we're hearing coming from the United States? Donald Trump doesn't want it. Hillary Clinton doesn't want it.
Yeah.
So what should Canada do?
Well, it's interesting because politically it's an odd thing. You've got people on the far left, like Bernie Sanders, in the States, at least he's considered far left in the States, who is anti-trade. Then you've got Donald Trump on the right, who's anti-trade, and Hillary Clinton, who's kind of in the middle somewhere. And then you've got same thing in Britain just recently with the Brexit. You have people on the far left that seem to be anti-EU, want to exit, and then people on the far right of the Conservative Party. But at the end of the day, we know that free trade is good for Canada. So we expect Prime Minister Trudeau to send a very strong message in support of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, talk about the importance for Canadian business people and Canadian taxpayers, and I hope that he will show that leadership on TPP, regardless of what's happening in U.S. politics right now. Canada needs to be a voice in favor of free trade around the world.
The leaders have also decided to put a greater focus on peacekeeping, perhaps in Colombia, perhaps in the Baltics for Canada. That seems to be in keeping with what the Liberal government has talked about, a shift to peacekeeping. How do you feel about that?
Well, that's an odd one because, I mean, I've talked to some people in the military, people that are high up in the military, and they say, well, there really is no peace to keep. And so the real concern right now is terror in the world. It's fighting ISIS. So, you know, we've been asked by NATO to provide troops along the border in Ukraine or Poland. I mean, I think we should be fulfilling our NATO obligations, or obviously I know the government's considering that. But, you know, further to that, I think we should be doing everything in our power and with every tool at our disposal to fight ISIS and support that coalition against terror. So I think peacekeeping is, you know, sounds great, but I still don't understand what this government means when they say they want to create a peacekeeping force, especially when you know, for all intents and purposes, there really is no peace to keep right now. I also worry about putting some of our men and women in harm's way. A lot of areas where we might send peacekeepers are not the kind of places that where we would find safety for our men and women in uniform. So I worry about the threat of terror in the world, and that would, you know, our men and women that would become peacekeepers would obviously be a target. So my real strong advice to the government is to stay focused on fighting terrorism.
Okay, let me finish on this. Canada did conclude a deal with Mexico to lift the visa restrictions on Mexican travelers. Mexico agrees to lift restrictions on beef imports to Mexico. How do you feel about those visa restrictions being lifted since they were imposed by the government you were part of?
Well, I think it's great that they lifted the restrictions on selling beef. It's not a huge market for Canada, but any amount of markets for our Canadian beef cattle producers is very good. So I'm glad to see that happen. Look, on the visa side, there was nothing we could do about the fact that 90% of the backlog in the refugee system was Mexican applicants, and they weren't valid applicants. So it's a real issue in the system. Now, we imposed the visa restriction, and that completely disappeared. Now, the Liberals are lifting it, so more than likely that problem is going to reemerge, and we're going to have a lot of Mexicans applying for refugee status, and they are in a refugee country. So I guess what I would say to the government is the problem will probably come back, and the government will have to deal with it. They'll have to figure out a way to deal with it. I mean, what it means is that when the system is clogged up, with people who are not valid refugees, it means that valid refugees that are coming from war-torn countries, persecuted places, don't have a speedy of access to our system. So I think the government will have to figure out how to fix that.
All right. Your government canceled the summit last year. Good idea that it went ahead this time?
Yeah, I mean, these summits, I mean, we took part in many of these kinds of summits over the years. And with an impending election, I think Mr. Harper thought it wasn't the right time to have a summit, and thought it best to wait till after the election. And I think that's the right call, especially very close to an election.
All right, Rona Ambrose, always appreciate your time. Thanks for
Peter.
giving us a bit of it tonight. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.